Israeli ministers are applauding the decision of 9 countries, including the U.S. and Britain, to suspend funding for the UN Refugee Agency for Palestinians, more commonly just known as UNRWA. These countries are stopping funding because of evidence presented that UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th massacre and that UNRWA staffers used UN vehicles and facilities during the hours-long terror onslaught. Israel's foreign minister says he wants even more donors to suspend funding and says UNRWA needs to be dismantled and replaced after the Hamas war. The head of UNRWA is speaking out, saying he's shocked by the decision and that it amounts to a form of collective punishment. With me now is Asaf Romirowsky, the executive director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and the co-author of Religion, Politics, and the Origins of the Palestine Refugee Relief. Thank you so much, Asaf, for being with me. Your initial thoughts here. This has been kind of a snowball over the weekend. Now we're up to 9 countries pausing, suspending donations to UNRWA. What do you make of that move? Is it justified? Is it logical, or is it collective punishment?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And 100% I agree that it's long overdue, actually. UNRWA has had a long history of being complacent with terror organizations. UNRWA has been working hand in hand not only with Hamas, also with PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other groups. UNRWA basically is a case study of where the client has hijacked a service provider and has made no distinctions ever about hiring members of Hamas. Actually, they've always seen it as diversity. You can be a member of Hamas by night, but a worker for UNRWA by day, which is what we saw now during the war, where you had UNRWA teachers, UNRWA medical workers, all working hand in hand and being exactly active in the taking of hostages and being part of that, being part of the war at large. So it's no surprise, it's long overdue. Interestingly enough, the United States actually froze money under the Trump administration, and then it was unfrozen when Biden took office. And now, as a result of what we're seeing now, the money has now been suspended again. So there's a lot of discussions about evidence that the Israeli intelligence are talking about showing the world again, but there's a long history to all of this, and I think it's long overdue. UNRWA has had a monopoly over what they define as the right of return, while they're the gatekeeper of the same problem, I would argue, that maintains Palestinian society in this stasis. UNRWA has been acting as a shadow government for the Palestinian Authority, and no bureaucracy wants to go out of business. So they've had a long history of this, and they've been doing this for decades now.
Asaf, I want to ask about the job UNRWA does on the ground, despite their flaws, and there are numerous flaws here, despite clearly the presence of suspected terrorists in their midst. Don't they serve a key function regarding the education of children, the delivery of humanitarian aid, the civilian infrastructure pieces here? You know, all these calls for them to UNRWA to be dismantled and eradicated. What will replace them in the short term amid the humanitarian crisis Gaza is facing? What would replace UNRWA and the job they serve?
So you're right. UNRWA's primary function to date now is really education, but the kind of education they're providing is Hamas education. So they're actually glorifying martyrology, jihadism. There has been a numerous amount of reports about the incitement going on in UNRWA textbooks. So they're not educating towards peace. Actually, going back into the 90s, back in the Oslo years, we demanded that there would be actually changes to the textbooks. Israel changes textbooks. Palestinian Authority never did, because UNRWA was responsible for that. The issue with UNRWA is UNRWA has an entire monopoly over all these facets: social services, education, and whatnot. So there has to be a phasing out of UNRWA. And what I have argued, and my colleagues over the years, but specifically about basically breaking UNRWA's monopoly. There is no transparency and accountability within the UNRWA system. You give a large amount of money. The United States alone gives close to $400 million annually in American taxpayer dollars, and they can't tell you how many laptops they bought, how many pencils they bought, et cetera, et cetera. So the argument that I've made is basically taking other UN services or other international organizations to basically break it down, one for education, one for health, at least for the sense of getting a sense of transparency, which is non-existent today. Beyond that, UNRWA is the largest employer of Palestinians. And so, as I said before, the fact that the client has hijacked a service provider, there has to be more outside oversight, more oversight about the money, more oversight about the services. Otherwise, we're going to be in the same cycle, which we've been in, by the way, for close to 7 decades. UNRWA has been operating in this regard. And it needs to be understood as well that, that UNRWA, maybe I would give them, the first 10 years of UNRWA's existence, they tried to stay true to their mandate. But the Arab world is very clear about this, that if they want to receive Arab world money, they have to become an advocacy organization for the Palestinian cause. That Palestinianization, that adaptation of becoming a full front Palestinian advocacy group where they see their work hand in hand with all groups, including Hamas, has made them what they are today.
Asaf, you mentioned that UNRWA being the largest single employer of Palestinians inside the Gaza Strip, and the idea of a phased out or a phased dismantling of this massive piece of bureaucracy in a post-war Gaza management scenario, we may bring in the Palestinian Authority. Israel may be involved in some kind of Gazan directorate involving enclaves. It's unclear how the post-war management would work. But what about all those Palestinians? Would they be hired instead by the Palestinian Authority? Would they be unemployed and then perhaps turn to terror instead?
We don't know, but what I will tell you for a fact is that UNRWA has been operating as a shadow government and also has been taking sets of money from other countries for UNRWA money, and the PA gets another sets of money. So, essentially, all these individuals who are basically civil servants should be, if there were a functioning Palestinian Authority and a Palestinian state to be, they should be part of that architecture. I don't see that really happening in the sense that the Palestinian Authority is not functioning, but the UNRWA architecture has been allowing to double dip as far as sets of money that have been coming into UNRWA. UNRWA has basically been arguing that they're the only game in town that takes care of all these services. UNRWA also argues that they will end their services when there is resolution for what they define as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because they are the gatekeeper of the one single issue that maintains the conflict, they have no desire or incentive to go out of business. So again, we have to find other phased out agencies. These services are going to be needed, whether or not it's going to be other groups or other kind of agencies that could work from international governments or other kind of NGOs to try to break the monopoly. That will be phase one, vis-a-vis exactly what the needs assessment are. Beyond that, this is another critical issue that relates to UNRWA funding. UNRWA gets funds based on the so-called status of refugees. Now, refugee status, according to UNRWA, and the only refugee organization worldwide, is you can inherit refugee status. So based on the trajectory where you can inherit refugee status, there'll be, going down the road, there'll be not 5-6 million refugees, but 20 million. And so there has to be also an end to the right of return, an end to the so-called refugee problem that they define. And if you want to give money, which is fine, it has to be based on need, not based on fallacious status. These are the things that need to change within the UNRWA architecture.
Asaf, thank you so much for being with us this morning on I-24 News.